All right, let's dive right in. Tonight, we're breaking down one of the most unbelievable pandemic relief frauds in American history. It's a story about a nonprofit, a web of shell companies, and a whole lot of money that was supposed to feed hungry kids.
And when I say a lot of money, I mean it. The number at the heart of this whole thing is $250 million. According to the Department of Justice, that's the sheer scale of this fraud. I mean, that figure alone just puts this scheme in a totally different league.
And look, this wasn't just some abstract government fund. Federal prosecutors say this money was ripped off directly from the Federal Child Nutrition Program. You know, the program that was supposed to be a lifeline for kids who needed a meal when the world was basically shutting down. So the big question is, how? How could a program with such a critical mission become the target for a heist this massive? Well, the answer, as you'll see, is a wild mix of opportunity, pure deception, and just some breathtaking greed. To really get what happened, we've got to look at the program at the center of it all. And, more importantly, we need to look at the rule changes made during the pandemic that, well, accidentally swung the door wide open for this kind of exploitation. Okay, so the Federal Child Nutrition Program has been around forever, but in the total chaos of the pandemic, the USDA waived some key rules to just get food to kids who weren't in school anymore. All of a sudden, for-profit restaurants could get in on it, and food could be given out pretty much anywhere. The DOJ alleges that these changes, which were totally well-intentioned, created the absolute perfect storm for this fraud to just explode.
You know, the lead federal prosecutor in Minnesota, he didn't pull any punches. He called it a brazen scheme of staggering proportions. That quote right there really tells you everything you need to know about the official shock over the sheer size and audacity of it all.
So how'd they actually pull it off? The idea behind it was pretty simple, but the way they executed it was incredibly complex. We're talking about a flood of fake documents and just a river of dirty money.
Here's how it was supposed to work. Federal money flows to the state. The Minnesota Department of Education then gives those funds to sponsor organizations. And the main sponsor here was a nonprofit called Feeding Our Future. Their job was to check and pay back hundreds of food sites. But prosecutors say that instead of serving meals, these sites just created fake invoices for kids that didn't exist, and the money went right into their bank accounts.
And to make these fake claims look real, the defendants allegedly created a literal mountain of fake paperwork. Phony invoices for food they never bought, fake meal count sheets. They even made up attendance rosters. And get this, in one case, the DOJ says they used a random name generator website to create lists of fake kids. The stolen money was then cleaned through shell companies, and kickbacks were paid to keep the whole thing going.
To really wrap your head around the scale here, let's just zoom in on one single case. A tiny grocery store that somehow became a multi-million-dollar cog in this machine?
So check this out. According to the IRS, the Evergreen Grocery and Deli signed up in April 2020. By December of that same year, this little storefront was claiming it was serving over 3,000 kids, twice a day. In just 1 year, it submitted claims for over 1.4 million meals. And the grand total this one small deli got from the government, based on those completely fake claims? An absolutely staggering $4.2 million.
And this right here really shows you the insane contrast between what the program was for and what actually happened. The IRS found that the money meant for kids' lunches was allegedly spent on luxury stuff from Burberry and Louis Vuitton, wired to foreign companies, and laundered through personal accounts to pay for fancy lifestyles.
Obviously, when you have fraud on this scale, someone is going to notice. The sheer amount of cash flowing out eventually set off alarm bells and sparked a massive federal investigation, one of the biggest of its kind in the country. So, the investigation kicked off with an initial wave of 47 people being charged by the DOJ. But as the case has grown, so have the numbers. Sources now say we're looking at a total of 78 indictments and, so far, 57 convictions. And the charges are no joke. We're talking conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, bribery. And then there's this, one of the wildest turns in the whole case. Several defendants were also charged with trying to bribe a juror with a bag filled with $120,000 in cash. Just incredible. So while all this was playing out in the courtroom, the story absolutely exploded in the court of public opinion. It was fueled by online commentators who were framing the whole narrative in some very different and often pretty inflammatory ways.
And this slide really highlights that split. On one side, you had public commentary claiming the fraud was up to $100 billion and the worst in human history.
often using some very charged and racialized language. And on the other side, you had the Department of Justice using very measured legal terms, calling it the largest pandemic relief fraud scheme charged to date. Two very different worlds.
The public outcry got so intense that local officials felt they had to respond directly. Here you have the Hennepin County attorney, Mary Moriarty, pushing back on what she saw as the singling out of the Somali community, which just goes to show you the deep social and political cracks this case ripped open. So, with dozens of people convicted and millions of dollars in assets seized, the legal fallout and the social fallout, well, it's far from over. And maybe the most chilling part of this whole thing comes from the FBI itself. Investigators have flat out said they believe what they've uncovered so far is just the very tip of a very large iceberg, and that the investigation is still very much ongoing. That just suggests this story could get even bigger.
And that leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? This case isn't just about stolen money. It's about a massive breach of trust right in the middle of a national crisis. It really forces us all to ask, when the systems that are supposed to help the most vulnerable people fail this badly, how do you ever get that trust back? How can government accountability ever truly be restored?